Imagine giving your absolute best to a company, only to be unjustly fired, humiliated, and left with nothing but shattered dreams. That's exactly what happened to Jae-hyun. But what if that crushing defeat wasn't the end, but the beginning of an epic quest for justice, where he uncovers a shocking truth about the very person who betrayed him? This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about turning humiliation into a powerful weapon for truth. Jae-hyun Kim moved through the bustling corridors of Innovatech with a practiced ease that belied his relatively short tenure. Every morning, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint hum of servers, a symphony that always invigorated him. At 28, Jae-hyun was not just an employee. He was a true believer in the company's vision, a future crafted through groundbreaking technology, where innovation was not just a buzzword, but the very breath of existence. He saw himself as a vital cog in this magnificent machine, a digital artisan shaping the future. One line of code, one meticulously designed interface at a time. His desk, nestled amidst a vibrant open-plan office, was a testament to his dedication. Organized, yet adorned with sticky notes bearing cryptic project details and a small framed photo of his parents, a quiet reminder of the sacrifices they had made for his education. Innovatech wasn't just a job. It was the culmination of years of relentless effort, late-night studies, and a burning ambition to make a mark in the competitive Korean tech landscape. He had joined the firm 2 years prior, fresh out of university, brimming with idealism, and had quickly risen through the ranks. His aptitude for problem-solving and his meticulous attention to detail earning him a reputation as a dependable and intelligent asset to his team. His days were a blur of meetings, coding sessions, and collaborative brainstorming, often stretching well past the official closing hours. He didn't mind the long hours. In fact, he thrived on them. The challenges invigorated him, and the satisfaction of seeing a complex project come to fruition fueled his passion. He dreamed of leading his own team one day, of contributing to a truly revolutionary product that would change lives. This wasn't just about a paycheck. It was about purpose, about creating something meaningful. He genuinely felt a part of something bigger, a collective endeavor towards a brighter future. Director Park, the head of their division, embodied the very spirit of Innovatech's success. Or so it seemed. Park Jin-woo was a man of imposing presence, his tailored suits always impeccable, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He moved with an aura of confident authority, his voice a smooth baritone that commanded attention in any room. Jae-hyun, like many junior employees, initially looked up to Director Park with a mixture of awe and admiration. Park was charismatic, often delivering rousing speeches about teamwork and dedication, painting vivid pictures of the company's glorious future. He seemed to possess an uncanny ability to motivate, to extract the best from his team, even if his methods were sometimes subtly demanding. There were whispers, of course, in the hushed corners of the office about Director Park's ruthless efficiency, his intolerance for failure, and his singular focus on results, sometimes at any cost. But Jae-hyun, in his youthful idealism, dismissed these as mere workplace gossip, the inevitable. Complaints that arose in any high-pressure environment. He saw Park's stern gaze not as intimidation, but as a challenge to strive for excellence. He wanted to impress Director Park, to prove his worth, to show that he was deserving of the trust placed in him. The corporate culture at Innovatech was a peculiar blend of traditional Korean hierarchical respect and modern, fast-paced innovation. Employees were expected to be loyal, diligent, and always put the company first. Long hours were not just tolerated, but often celebrated as a sign of commitment. There was a palpable sense of competition, yet also a strong emphasis on team cohesion. Jae-hyun navigated this environment deftly, respecting his seniors, collaborating effectively with his peers, and always delivering his assignments on time, often exceeding expectations. He was a model employee, deeply ingrained in the fabric of Innovatech, seeing it not just as his workplace but as a second home, a place where his ambitions could truly take flight. His mornings often began with a quick check of his project dashboards, followed by a brief, respectful greeting to his immediate team leader, Ms. Choi, before diving into the day's tasks. He'd review code, troubleshoot bugs, and participate in lively discussions about user experience, his mind buzzing with possibilities. Lunch breaks were often spent discussing the latest tech trends with his friend, Min-jun, a fellow developer, who shared Jae-hyun's passion for coding but possessed a more cynical view of corporate politics. Min-jun would often joke about the corporate ladder being more of a corporate slippery slide for those who weren't careful. Jae-hyun, ever the optimist, would simply laugh it off, confident in his own abilities and the integrity of his work. Evenings, especially during crunch times, often saw him ordering in dinner, his reflection a ghost in the darkened office windows as he continued to tap away at his keyboard. He believed in the mission. He believed in his team, and he believed in the leadership. He had invested not just his time and skill, but a significant portion of his identity into Innovatech. His dreams were intertwined with the company's success, and every small victory felt like a personal triumph. He was building a future, brick by digital brick, and the foundation felt solid, unshakable. He couldn't have imagined then how quickly that foundation would crumble beneath him, leaving him adrift in a sea of despair. Before we dive deeper into Jae-hyun's incredible journey, I'm curious, where are you watching this story from? Let me know in the comments below. The air in Innovatech's development wing grew thick with anticipation and stress as the deadline for Project Phoenix loomed large. This was not just another project. It was a flagship initiative, a groundbreaking AI-driven platform that promised to revolutionize financial analytics. Its success was critical, not only for Innovatech's market position, but for the careers of everyone involved, especially Director Park, who had staked his reputation on its delivery. For weeks, the entire team, including Jae-hyun, had been working around the clock, fueled by caffeine, nervous energy, and the collective desire to see their monumental efforts bear fruit. Jae-hyun, as usual, was at the forefront of the charge. He had taken on the most complex modules, dedicating himself to meticulous testing and optimization. His apartment had become little more than a place to crash, his social life a distant memory. He'd often find himself coding until the early hours, snatching a few hours of sleep, and then returning to the office before dawn, his mind still replaying lines of code, searching for potential flaws. He sacrificed weekends, ignored calls from worried friends, and postponed family gatherings, all for Project Phoenix. He believed in the project, in its potential, and in his role in bringing it to life. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, a personal stake in its triumph. Director Park's presence became even more pronounced during this period. He prowled the office floor, his eyes sharp, his voice taut, demanding updates, pushing for faster progress, his charismatic facade occasionally cracking to reveal the immense pressure he was under. He held daily, sometimes hourly, stand-up meetings, dissecting every minute detail, his expectations soaring with each passing day. The stress was palpable, a suffocating blanket that settled over everyone. Jae-hyun saw the subtle changes in Park, the flicker of desperation in his eyes, the increasingly terse directives, but attributed it to the high stakes of the project. He simply worked harder, determined to alleviate any potential issues. Then came the morning of the final review. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The team had pulled an all-nighter, putting the finishing touches on the presentation build. Jae-hyun, personally, had meticulously reviewed the core functionalities, ensuring every integration was seamless. He felt a quiet pride in their collective achievement. Just hours before the crucial client demonstration, a minor bug was discovered in a peripheral user interface module, a small display glitch that caused a temporary misalignment of text under specific rare conditions. It was a cosmetic issue, easily fixable with a quick patch, and certainly not a critical flaw that would jeopardize the entire project. In the grand scheme of Project Phoenix, it was an almost negligible detail. Jae-hyun, discovering the bug, immediately flagged it. "Director Park, there's a small UI issue here," he reported calmly, pointing to his screen. "It's in the tertiary display, under a very specific data load. I can have a fix implemented and tested within an hour, well before the client arrives." Director Park, however, reacted with an unexpected fury. His face, usually composed, contorted into a mask of cold rage. An hour? An hour, Jae-hyun? We have mere minutes. This is unacceptable. This is a reflection of sloppiness, of a lack of commitment. His voice, usually smooth, was now a sharp, cutting blade. He didn't shout, but his controlled anger was far more chilling than any outburst. The room fell silent, all eyes on Jae-hyun, who felt a sudden, inexplicable chill run down his spine. But director, it's a minor visual bug. It doesn't affect the core functionality, and it's easily... Jae-hyun tried to explain, but he was cut off mid-sentence. No excuses, Kim. No excuses. Park's eyes, usually warm and engaging, were now hard and glacial. This jeopardizes everything. This shows a fundamental lack of foresight, a failure of due diligence. I cannot, in good conscience, have someone with such a blatant disregard for perfection on my team. He paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air, a public indictment. Consider this your last day at Innovatech, Jae-hyun. You are dismissed. The my words hit Jae-hyun like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Dismissed? For this? His mind reeled. He couldn't process it. The injustice was so blatant, so absolute. He had poured his heart and soul into this company, into this project. He had sacrificed everything, and now, for a minor, rectifiable bug, he was being publicly humiliated and cast aside. It made no sense. He looked around the room, at the stunned faces of his colleagues, some avoiding his gaze, others looking on with pity or fear. His friend, Min-jun, offered a silent, helpless look of shock. Director Park, please, this is an overreaction, Jae-hyun managed to stammer, his voice thin and shaky. I can fix this. I promise. The client won't even see it. The decision is final, Jae-hyun, Park stated, his voice now devoid of all emotion, a cold, unyielding pronouncement. Collect your personal belongings and leave the premises immediately. Security will escort you out. The implicit threat in his tone was clear. Argue further, and it would only get worse. The message to the rest of the team was equally clear. Failure, even minor, would not be tolerated, and scapegoats would be found. Humiliation washed over Jae-hyun, a burning tide of shame and disbelief. His face flushed hot, then cold. His hands trembled as he slowly, mechanically, began to gather his few personal items from his desk. The small framed photo of his parents suddenly felt heavy, a reminder of the dreams he had just seen shattered. Every eye felt like a burning spotlight, every whisper a judgment. The vibrant, bustling office, once a place of purpose and belonging, now felt like a hostile, alien environment. He felt exposed, stripped bare of his dignity, his worth as a professional ruthlessly invalidated. Escorted by a stoic security guard, Jae-hyun walked out of Innovatech for the last time, the weight of his dismissal crushing his spirit. The automatic doors slid shut behind him, severing his connection to the life he had so painstakingly built. The bright, hopeful future he had envisioned moments ago had dissolved into a dark, terrifying void. He was unemployed, disgraced, and utterly broken. The world, which had seemed so full of promise, had suddenly turned its back on him, leaving him adrift and alone with the bitter taste of betrayal on his tongue. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an arbitrary decision. It felt too sudden, too harsh, almost convenient. The weeks that followed, Jae-hyun's dismissal, were a descent into a desolate landscape of despair. The initial shock gave way to a gnawing emptiness, a profound sense of loss that permeated every aspect of his existence. His once organized apartment, a reflection of his meticulous nature, slowly succumbed to disorder, mirroring the chaos within his mind. Dirty dishes piled up, laundry lay unfolded, and the once vibrant plants withered from neglect. He found himself spending endless hours staring blankly at the ceiling, the silence of his small space amplifying the deafening roar of his inner turmoil. The shame was a heavy, suffocating blanket. In Korean society, losing one's job, especially in such a public and seemingly arbitrary manner, carried a significant social stigma. It wasn't just a professional setback. It was a personal failing, a mark of dishonor. He avoided calls from friends, ashamed to admit the truth. His parents, though supportive, couldn't hide their worry and disappointment, which only amplified his guilt. He felt like he had let everyone down, especially himself. Sleep became an elusive luxury, plagued by restless nights, filled with anxious thoughts and vivid replays of Director Park's cold, damning words. When he did manage to drift off, he was haunted by nightmares of being chased through Innovatech's corridors, unable to catch up, falling further and further behind. Mornings were the worst, the harsh light of day a brutal reminder of his unemployment. He'd spend hours scrolling through job boards, his hope dwindling with each rejection. The mere mention of Innovatech on his resume now felt like a scarlet letter, an unspoken question mark that potential employers couldn't overlook. Financial hardship soon began to bite. His savings, once a comfortable cushion, quickly eroded under the weight of rent, utilities, and dwindling prospects. He started cutting corners, eating instant ramen for most meals, and canceling subscriptions. The petty indignities of poverty added another layer to his despair, reinforcing his sense of helplessness. He felt trapped, caught in a downward spiral he couldn't escape. During these dark, introspective days, as his mind grappled with the injustice, certain memories began to resurface. Fragments of his time at Innovatech that he had previously dismissed as inconsequential. They were like faint echoes, barely audible at first but slowly growing louder. He recalled Director Park's insistence on using a particular, relatively unknown third-party vendor for a significant software license, despite the team's preference for a more established and cost-effective alternative. Park had overridden their concerns with a vague explanation about strategic partnerships and long-term vision, a vision that Jae-hyun had accepted without question at the time. Then there was the peculiar incident during the initial budgeting for Project Phoenix. Director Park had mysteriously inflated the allocation for contingency and external consulting fees to an unusually high sum, far exceeding industry standards, citing unforeseen complexities that never quite materialized. Jae-hyun, focused on the technical challenges, had merely noted it as an oddity, a quirk of corporate finance he didn't fully understand. He remembered a particularly intense meeting where Park had shut down a junior analyst's detailed report that highlighted a potential cost-saving measure on a separate project, almost aggressively dismissing the analyst's findings with a dismissive wave of his hand. At the time, Jae-hyun had assumed Park simply knew better, had a broader perspective. Now these disparate recollections began to coalesce, forming a faint, almost subconscious seed of suspicion. Could his dismissal have been more than just an arbitrary act of an overly stressed boss? The minor UI bug, easily fixable, seemed like such a flimsy pretext for such a severe, career-ending punishment. It was disproportionate, illogical. He had seen colleagues make far greater mistakes and receive mere reprimands. Why him? Why then? The question gnawed at him, a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. He started to replay the scene of his firing, not just the raw emotion, but the cold calculation in Director Park's eyes. It wasn't just anger, there was something else, a strange finality, almost a sense of relief in Park's demeanor once the words were spoken. It was as if Park had been waiting for an opportunity, any opportunity, to remove him. But why? What purpose would his dismissal serve beyond a cruel display of power? This tiny seed of doubt, planted amidst the fertile ground of his despair, began to subtly shift his perspective. It wasn't a fully formed accusation, not yet. It was merely a nagging sensation that his firing wasn't just arbitrary, but perhaps convenient. Convenient for Director Park. The thought, once dismissed as paranoid, now echoed in the quiet corners of his mind, a faint but persistent whisper that refused to be silenced. It was a fragile hope, a desperate attempt to find meaning in his suffering, to transform the senseless injustice into something with a deeper, darker, and more sinister explanation. This faint suspicion, almost imperceptible at first, would eventually become the spark that reignited his spirit, propelling him out of the abyss. 3 years. 3 long, arduous years had passed since the day Jae-hyun Kim walked out of Innovatech, his world in ruins. The initial period of despair had been a brutal crucible, stripping him bare of his youthful idealism and corporate identity. But from the ashes of that humiliation, something new had begun to emerge, a tougher, more resilient, and quietly determined individual. Rock bottom, he discovered, had a strange way of offering a clear view of the path forward. He had spent months grappling with depression, the sting of rejection, and the crushing weight of financial insecurity. He had taken odd jobs, anything to keep afloat. Part-time coding for small businesses, even tutoring high school students in math and science. These experiences, though far removed from his ambitious corporate dreams, forced him to adapt, to rely on his core skills, and to connect with people outside the insular world of big tech. He learned humility and the true value of hard work, stripped of the glossy veneer of corporate prestige. The turning point came slowly, not in a single dramatic epiphany, but through a series of small, deliberate choices. He realized he couldn't let Director Park, or the trauma of his dismissal, define his entire future. The anger and hurt, once a corrosive poison, began to transform into a quiet, unwavering resolve. He wouldn't just survive, he would thrive, not for Park, but for himself. He decided to pivot, to leverage his innate tech skills in a different direction. He immersed himself in online courses, voraciously consuming knowledge on data analytics, cybersecurity, and advanced digital forensics. He spent countless hours late into the night, hunched over his laptop, rebuilding his technical prowess, not just to get a job, but to master new domains. He saw these new skills not merely as tools, but as weapons in an unseen future battle. Though for what, he wasn't yet certain. The memory of Innovatech, of the injustice, remained a faint but persistent echo, a constant reminder that integrity mattered and that a solid facade could hide rot beneath. His breakthrough came when he landed a position at Nexus Solutions, a small but ethical cybersecurity startup. It was a far cry from the glittering towers of Innovatech, nestled in a quieter district, its office humming with a different kind of energy, one built on genuine collaboration, transparency, and a shared passion for protecting digital landscapes. Here, there was no cutthroat competition, no opaque corporate politics. His colleagues were earnest, brilliant, and supportive. His new boss, Ms. Lee, was a pragmatic and fair leader, valuing contribution over conformity and competence over corporate theatrics. Jae-hyun found a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he'd been missing. At Nexus, he flourished. His meticulous nature, once seen as a potential flaw by Director Park, was now celebrated as an asset. His deep understanding of system vulnerabilities and his knack for uncovering hidden patterns made him invaluable. He developed an expertise in digital footprint analysis and data recovery, skills that were both challenging and deeply satisfying. He was building sophisticated security protocols for clients, protecting them from the very kind of hidden threats he now instinctively looked for. He found a renewed sense of purpose, a satisfaction that came from genuine contribution, not from chasing an elusive corporate dream. Physically, he had changed too. The gaunt, haunted look of despair had been replaced by a lean, more confident demeanor. He picked up running, finding solace and clarity in the rhythmic pounding of his feet on the pavement, pushing himself harder, just as he pushed himself in his professional life. His eyes, once clouded with sadness, now held a sharper, more focused gaze. He was no longer the naive, trusting employee. He had matured, become more discerning, more skeptical of grand pronouncements and flashy presentations. He had built a new life, a stable foundation for himself. He had even reconnected with Min-jun, his old colleague from Innovatech, who had also left the company a year after Jae-hyun, citing increasingly toxic management. Their occasional coffee meetings were a safe space to reminisce, and sometimes to quietly vent about the past. Min-jun, now at a competitor, had subtly hinted at Innovatech's continued aggressive growth, often at questionable speeds, but neither of them dwelled on it too much. They had moved on, yet the sting of the past, though dulled by time and success, still lingered. It wasn't a wound that bled openly anymore, but a deep fibrous scar tissue. It manifested as a quiet, unwavering determination. a resolve to always act with integrity, to be vigilant against deception, and to never again allow himself to be a pawn in someone else's game. The humiliation had been a catalyst, hardening his resolve, sharpening his intellect, and preparing him, unbeknownst to him, for a battle he hadn't yet realized he was destined to fight. He was no longer just Jae-hyun Kim, the discarded employee. He was Jae-hyun Kim, the resilient survivor, quietly formidable, and unknowingly on the precipice of a discovery that would reshape his past and define his future. The scent of roasted coffee beans and the quiet murmur of conversations filled the trendy cafe where Jae-hyun met Min-jun for their monthly catch-up. 3 years had forged a new bond between them, a shared understanding born from their intertwined past at Innovatech and their subsequent escape from its clutches. Jae-hyun, now a senior cybersecurity analyst at Nexus, felt a comfortable ease in Min-jun's company, a rare luxury in his increasingly cautious life. They talked about industry trends, shared war stories from their respective companies, and occasionally, with a shared knowing glance, touched upon their Innovatech days, careful not to let the bitterness overwhelm their present peace. Today, however, was different. Min-jun, usually jovial and lighthearted, had a furrow in his brow. He pushed a tablet across the table, its screen displaying a recent news article. "Jae-hyun, have you seen this?" His voice was low, laced with a subtle unease. The headline blared, "Innovatech reports record profits, strategic expansions under Director Park's leadership." Jae-hyun skimmed the article, a familiar knot tightening in his stomach at the mention of Director Park's name. He had made a conscious effort to detach himself from Innovatech news, but the company remained a ghost in his periphery. He noted the glowing praise for Park, the impressive growth figures, the talk of new international ventures. On the surface, it was a story of triumph, a testament to relentless ambition. But Min-jun pointed to a specific paragraph, his finger hovering over the text. "Look here. The article mentions a significant increase in external consulting and procurement fees for the expansion into Southeast Asian markets, particularly concerning the Project Horizon contracts. It says these fees were unusually high, even for a company of Innovatech's scale, but attributed to unforeseen market complexities and specialized local expertise. Director Park, apparently, was the primary architect of these deals." The words resonated with a chilling familiarity. Jae-hyun's mind immediately flashed back to the initial budgeting for Project Phoenix, to Director Park's vague justifications for inflated contingency and external consulting fees. That small, almost subconscious seed of doubt he had carried for years, buried deep beneath. His renewed sense of purpose suddenly stirred. It was no longer a whisper. It was a distinct, unsettling echo. "Unusual fees, unforeseen complexities," Jae-hyun murmured, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "That sounds familiar. Too familiar." His gaze sharpened, focusing on the financial figures. He noticed the revenue growth was impressive, almost too impressive, for the reported increase in market share. There was a discrepancy, a subtle imbalance that his newly honed analytical mind, trained to spot anomalies in complex data sets, immediately picked up on. Min-jun leaned closer. "Exactly. And it's not just the fees. There have been whispers, in the industry. Little things. A sudden, unexplained churn of certain mid-level managers who worked on those projects. Suppliers who mysteriously changed hands despite long-standing relationships. Nothing concrete, just smoke. But where there's smoke, there's often fire, right?" Jae-hyun felt a jolt. The fragments were starting to align, not into a clear picture, but into a disturbing silhouette. His dismissal, once a singular act of arbitrary cruelty, now seemed to fit into a larger, more sinister pattern. Could he have been a casualty of something far greater than a mere power play? A scapegoat not just for a project, but for a cover-up? The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He remembered Director Park's cold, calculating eyes during his dismissal. That strange sense of relief, almost satisfaction, in Park's demeanor. It wasn't just about Project Phoenix. It was about removing him, Jae-hyun Kim, from the equation. But why? What did he, a diligent but relatively junior developer, know or represent that made him a liability? Project Horizon. I remember that name, Jae-hyun said, his voice quiet but firm. It was in its early planning stages when I was there. Park was already hyping it up as the next big thing. He took the tablet from Min-jun, his fingers tracing the lines of the article. His mind was already whirring, connecting the dots. His cybersecurity expertise, his understanding of digital forensics, his newfound skepticism, all these elements were now converging, pointing him towards a path he hadn't sought but felt compelled to follow. The initial reaction was a mix of trepidation and a strange, almost intoxicating sense of purpose. Getting involved meant stepping back into the shadow of Innovatech, into the orbit of Director Park, a place he had vowed never to revisit. It meant risking his newfound peace, potentially even his career at Nexus. But the pull of injustice was too strong. The idea that Park might not just have been a cruel boss, but a corrupt criminal, ignited a fire within him. It wasn't just about personal hurt anymore. It was about a deeper sense of right and wrong. A moral imperative that he, with his unique skills, might be uniquely positioned to address. I need to look into this, Jae-hyun finally declared, meeting Min-jun's worried gaze. Just to satisfy my curiosity. There's something off here, Min-jun. I can feel it. Min-jun nodded slowly, a grim understanding in his eyes. Be careful, Jae-hyun. Park is a powerful man, and if these whispers are true, he's a dangerous one. Jae-hyun's resolve hardened. He knew the risks, but the tiny seed of doubt, which had lain dormant for 3 years, had finally found fertile ground. It was no longer a seed. It was a burgeoning sprout, demanding nourishment, demanding answers. And Jae-hyun, with a newfound sense of quiet determination, was ready to provide them. If you're captivated by stories of resilience and justice like Jae-hyun's, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. The initial curiosity that had sparked Jae-hyun's investigation quickly transformed into a consuming obsession. The quiet evenings he once spent unwinding with a book or catching up on personal projects at Nexus were now entirely dedicated to Innovatech. His apartment, once a haven of peace, became his clandestine command center, bathed in the soft glow of multiple monitors displaying a labyrinth of data. He started subtly, using his advanced tech skills to scour public records. He cross-referenced company filings, examined financial disclosures, and delved into archived news reports. He utilized anonymized proxy servers and virtual private networks, creating a digital ghost trail that couldn't be traced back to him. His experience at Nexus, where he routinely analyzed complex digital footprints to identify vulnerabilities and threats, proved invaluable. He knew where to look, what keywords to use, and how to sift through mountains of innocuous data to find the subtle glint of an anomaly. The first thread he pulled was the external consulting and procurement fees for Project Horizon. He researched the specific vendors mentioned in the public reports. He found that one of the primary consulting firms, Aurora Dynamics, was registered in a tax haven, with a convoluted ownership structure that made it nearly impossible to identify the true beneficiaries. This immediately raised a red flag. Large, reputable companies rarely engaged with such opaque entities for major projects unless there was a hidden agenda. He then began to look into the executives associated with Aurora Dynamics, digging into their digital pasts. What he found was a subtle, almost imperceptible link, a dormant social media profile of a seemingly minor executive at Aurora who, years ago, had briefly worked for a small, now-defunct startup that Director Park had once been an early investor in. The connection was tenuous, easily dismissed by an untrained eye, but for Jae-hyun it was a vital clue, a thread leading deeper into the labyrinth. Next, he turned his attention to Innovatech's internal structure, piecing together a virtual organizational chart of Project Horizon. He subtly reached out to his old network, not asking direct questions about fraud, but fishing for general insights into the project, the team dynamics, and particularly Director Park's oversight. He connected with former Innovatech colleagues on LinkedIn, carefully crafting messages that seemed innocuous, inquiring about general career advice or industry trends. Slowly, he he began to receive fragmented pieces of information. One former project manager, now at a competitor, casually mentioned, during an online chat, that Director Park had maintained an unusually tight grip on all financial approvals for Project Horizon, bypassing standard departmental checks. Another former supplier, who had lost a lucrative contract unexpectedly, expressed frustration about Innovatec suddenly favoring a new, less established supplier without clear justification. It was all Park's doing, the supplier's anonymous email read. He made the calls, no questions asked. As Jae-hyun connected these disparate pieces, a chilling picture began to emerge. Director Park wasn't just inflating fees, he was orchestrating a sophisticated scheme of embezzlement and kickbacks. Aurora Dynamics, it seemed, was a shell company, or at least a front, used to funnel Innovatec's funds into Park's own pockets. The inflated consulting fees were actually laundered money, disguised as legitimate business expenses. The favored new suppliers were likely fronts or collaborators in the scheme, receiving inflated high contracts and then kicking back a portion to Park. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. Millions of dollars, disguised within the legitimate operations of a prominent tech firm. Park had used his position, his charisma, and his tight control over critical projects to build his own personal empire of illicit wealth, all hidden behind a meticulously crafted facade of corporate success. He had leveraged the very trust and ambition of his employees, Jae-hyun included, to fuel his greed. Jae-hyun felt a cold rage building within him. This wasn't just about a greedy executive. It was about a profound betrayal of trust, a desecration of the very ideals he had once held for Innovatec. His own unjust dismissal now seemed chillingly clear. He hadn't been fired for a minor bug. He had been fired because he was too meticulous, too observant, too much of an unknown variable in Park's carefully constructed house of cards. Perhaps he had inadvertently stumbled upon a detail, asked a question, or simply observed something that, in Park's paranoid mind, made him a potential threat. Removing him was a preemptive strike, a way to eliminate a potential witness before the deeper fraud could be fully executed. The investigation consumed his nights and weekends. He worked with a fierce, almost primal determination. The fear of discovery was a constant companion, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He knew Park was powerful, resourceful, and ruthless. If Park ever caught wind of his investigation, the consequences could be dire. But the pull of justice, intertwined with a deep, lingering sense of personal vindication, was now far stronger than any fear. He wasn't just looking for answers, he was hunting for the truth, for undeniable proof that would bring down the man who had shattered his dreams. The web of deceit was complex, but Jae-hyun, now a master of digital forensics, was systematically unraveling every single strand. The unraveling of Director Park's intricate web of deceit transformed Jae-hyun from an investigator into a meticulous evidence collector. This phase was less about discovery and more about solidification, turning whispers and suspicions into irrefutable, undeniable proof. It demanded an almost superhuman level of patience, precision, and operational security. His apartment became a fortress of digital secrecy, his actions shrouded in the deepest anonymity. He worked predominantly in the dead of night, when the digital world was quieter and the chances of detection were minimized. His setup was elaborate. A dedicated, encrypted laptop running on a live operating system, routed through multiple VPNs and anonymizing proxies, connected to the internet via a burner mobile hotspot. He used encrypted messaging apps for any discrete contacts and wiped his digital tracks with the precision of a ghost. Every keystroke, every search query, every downloaded document was part of a carefully orchestrated ballet of stealth. His primary targets were digital footprints. He hunted for financial irregularities within public records that, when cross-referenced with internal Innovatec documents, he had subtly acquired through former colleagues, who unknowingly provided him data for industry research. Began to tell a damning story. He found shell companies registered in remote jurisdictions, their financial statements conspicuously vague. He traced funds flowing from Innovatec through these shell entities, and then disappearing into a maze of offshore accounts, often linked by a single recurring individual, a nominee director whose name occasionally appeared in connection with Director Park's personal investments. He discovered inflated invoices for software licenses and consulting services from these phantom companies, prices far exceeding market value. He used his deep understanding of Innovatech's internal project management systems, knowledge from his tenure there, to identify discrepancies in reported project costs versus actual deliverables. He found evidence of kickbacks disguised as referral fees or performance bonuses paid to accounts that, with clever digital sleuthing, he linked to Director Park's personal financial interests, albeit through several layers of obfuscation. One crucial piece of evidence came from a disgruntled former supplier. Jae-hyun, after weeks of careful research, identified a small tech firm that had been abruptly dropped by Innovatech in favor of one of Park's shell companies. He reached out to their CEO, Mr. Han, through an anonymous encrypted email, presenting a general premise of investigating unfair business practices at Innovatech. Mr. Han, still bitter, provided Jae-hyun with copies of his original competitive bids and the subsequent, much higher, invoices from Park's favored vendor, proving a clear pattern of inflated pricing. This was gold, tangible, non-digital evidence that corroborated the digital trails. Another breakthrough came when Jae-hyun, through sheer persistence, managed to access an archived internal company forum. Hidden deep within years of old posts, he found a cryptic conversation between two mid-level managers who had worked on Project Horizon. They were subtly complaining about unaccounted budget shifts and unusual pressure from the top to approve vague expenditures. While not outright proof of fraud, it showcased a pattern of concern and a top-down mandate to ignore red flags, a testament to Park's iron grip and the fear he instilled. The emotional toll was immense. Jae-hyun lived in a state of constant vigilance, always looking over his shoulder, even when alone. The weight of the responsibility was heavy. He was isolated, unable to share the true nature of his work with anyone, not even Min-jun. Paranoia was a constant companion, whispering doubts in his ear. What if he missed something? What if Park discovered him? The thought of facing Park's wrath, especially now, with the full scope of his criminal enterprise laid bare, was terrifying. But the rising tide of concrete evidence, each piece slotting perfectly into place, fueled his resolve. This wasn't just about personal revenge anymore. It was about exposing a systemic corruption that preyed on the very integrity of the industry he loved. He meticulously organized his findings into a comprehensive digital dossier. Encrypted folders held scanned documents, screenshots of bank transfers, anonymized email chains, and a far, detailed timeline of events. He cross-referenced every piece of data, building an unshakable narrative of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. He even drafted a concise executive summary, outlining Park's modus operandi, the key players involved, and the estimated financial damages. This wasn't a collection of disparate facts. It was a compelling, irrefutable case, ready to be presented. As the dossier grew, a strange sense of quiet power settled over Jae-hyun. He wasn't the broken, humiliated young man who had been cast out. He was a force, armed with truth, meticulously crafted and unassailable. The fear was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overshadowed by a burning certainty. He had not just gathered evidence, he had forged a weapon, honed and sharpened, and he was ready to wield it. The reckoning was not just looming, it was now within his grasp. With the voluminous dossier of damning evidence meticulously compiled and securely stored, Jae-hyun entered the most critical phase of his plan: strategy. The sheer weight of the proof he had amassed was staggering, far exceeding his initial suspicions. Director Park wasn't just a petty embezzler, he was a sophisticated criminal, and exposing him required more than just throwing facts at a wall. It demanded surgical precision, an understanding of the legal and corporate landscapes, and a clear vision for maximum impact and irrefutable justice. He spent days, then weeks, agonizing over his options, each path fraught with its own risks and rewards. He considered internal whistleblowing. This might offer a degree of protection, perhaps even anonymity, if Innovatech's internal compliance department was truly independent and robust. But what if they weren't? What if Park's influence extended deeper than he knew? The risk of his evidence being suppressed, or worse, of him being unmasked and retaliated against, was too high. He had seen how Park operated. The man was a master manipulator and internal. Channels could easily be corrupted or stonewalled. Then there was the option of going directly to the media. This promised immediate public exposure, a swift and dramatic downfall for Park. The media loved a scandal, especially one involving a high-profile executive at a major tech firm. But this path was also incredibly dangerous. It would strip him of all anonymity, thrusting him into the public eye as a whistleblower, making him a potential target. Moreover, a media expose, while impactful, might not lead to the concrete legal repercussions he sought. It could become a sensationalized story without the necessary legal follow-through, allowing Park to potentially escape with minimal consequences, merely a tarnished reputation. Formal legal action was another avenue. Presenting the evidence to prosecutors or regulatory bodies, such as the Financial Supervisory Service, would ensure a thorough investigation and the highest likelihood of criminal charges. This was the path that promised true justice, not just public shaming. However, legal processes were notoriously slow, arduous, and could drag on for years. There was also the risk of his evidence being deemed inadmissible, or of Park's legal team finding loopholes. And even then, he would likely have to reveal himself, becoming a key witness in a protracted legal battle. Jae-hyun wanted more than just personal revenge. While the satisfaction of seeing Park fall would be immense, his motivation had evolved. It was about exposing the truth, protecting Innovatech from further corruption, and upholding a sense of integrity that Park had so brazenly violated. He sought an outcome that was undeniable, irreversible, and comprehensive, one that would lead to both public disgrace and legal accountability. He began to develop a hybrid strategy, a carefully calibrated approach designed to maximize impact while mitigating his personal risk. His plan began with an anonymous, highly detailed submission to a reputable, independent financial investigative journalism outlet known for its integrity and its track record of breaking high-profile corporate scandals. This would ensure immediate public attention and scrutiny. However, this submission would be incomplete, lacking a few critical pieces of evidence, subtly hinting that there was more to uncover. Simultaneously, he would prepare a separate, fully comprehensive dossier, complete with all irrefutable evidence, and a meticulously crafted legal complaint. This document would be submitted directly to the Financial Supervisory Service and the Public Prosecutor's Office, but only after the media story had broken. The media exposure would create an undeniable public demand for action, making it impossible for authorities to ignore or quietly dismiss the case. It would apply immense pressure on Innovatech to cooperate and on the legal system to act swiftly and decisively. The timing was crucial. The public outcry would force the legal hand, ensuring the evidence couldn't be buried. He also considered a safety net. He would secure a trusted, independent legal counsel, anonymously, to review his plan and ensure its legality and maximum impact. This lawyer, unaware of Jae-hyun's identity, would act as a contingency, ready to step in if his initial moves met unexpected resistance. The tension in Jae-hyun's small apartment was almost suffocating. He paced back and forth, his mind racing, replaying scenarios, anticipating Park's reactions and planning countermoves. He knew the moment he pressed send, there would be no turning back. His quiet life, painstakingly rebuilt over 3 years, would be irrevocably altered. But a deep, unwavering resolve had taken root. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful sense of purpose. He was no longer the victim. He was the architect of justice. He was ready. The reckoning was at hand, and Director Park was about to face the consequences of his betrayal. The morning began like any other Tuesday, a gray, unremarkable dawn over the sprawling metropolis of Seoul. But for Jae-hyun Kim, It was the day that 3 years of silent suffering and painstaking investigation would culminate in a cataclysmic eruption. He sat at his desk, not at Nexus, but in the quiet solitude of his apartment, his fingers hovering over the send button. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. This was it, the point of no return. He took a deep breath, the scent of stale coffee and nervous energy filling his lungs. He double-checked the recipient list one last time. A carefully selected group of top-tier financial journalists from reputable national newspapers and investigative news programs. The anonymous email, encrypted and routed through layers of proxies, contained a teaser, a meticulously crafted summary of Innovatech's financial irregularities, hinting at Director Park's involvement, accompanied by a few tantalizing but incomplete pieces of evidence. Enough to pique their interest, enough to make them dig deeper, but not enough to compromise his full dossier. With a final resolute exhale, he pressed send. The digital dominoes began to fall almost immediately. Within hours, the first tremors of the earthquake hit. A prominent online financial news portal, known for its rapid breaking stories, published an article under a cryptic headline: Whispers of Irregularities at Innovatech, Director Park's projects under scrutiny. It was vague, cautious, but the seed was planted. Other outlets quickly picked up the scent, their own journalists scrambling to verify the anonymous tips. By midday, the whispers had escalated into a roaring chorus. News channels began running segments. Social media exploded with speculation. Innovatech's stock, once a bastion of stability, began to dip, then plummet, as investors reacted to the growing uncertainty. The carefully constructed new image of Director Park, the charismatic leader, began to crack under the intense public glare. Jae-hyun watched from the shadows, a ghost in the machine, as his plan unfolded with terrifying efficiency. He saw the frantic reactions from Innovatech, their initial official statements dismissing the reports as unfounded rumors and corporate espionage. But it was too late. The narrative had taken hold. That afternoon, as Innovatech's PR team scrambled to control the narrative, Jae-hyun executed the second phase of his plan. He uploaded his complete irrefutable dossier, every scanned invoice, every traced offshore transfer, every email, every witness statement from the former supplier, Mr. Han, to a secure, anonymized server. He then sent another encrypted email, this time to the Financial Supervisory Service and the Public Prosecutor's Office, containing a link to the full dossier and a formal, detailed complaint, clearly outlining Director Park's scheme, the evidence supporting it, and the legal statutes violated. The public outcry from the media reports had already created an undeniable imperative for these agencies to act swiftly and visibly. Director Park's world, built on a foundation of lies, began its spectacular collapse. The initial reports of whispers quickly transformed into damning headlines. Innovatech rocked by multi-million-dollar fraud allegations. Director Park implicated in elaborate embezzlement scheme. Photos of a grim-faced Park, usually smiling and confident, now appeared next to stark accusations. The corporate empire he had so meticulously crafted crumbled in real time. Innovatech's board of directors, facing a catastrophic stock freefall and a public relations nightmare, announced an immediate internal investigation and placed Director Park on indefinite leave. Jae-hyun felt a strange mix of exhilaration and exhaustion. He watched the news, saw the faces of Innovatech employees, their shock and dismay palpable. He felt a profound sense of vindication, a quiet satisfaction that was deeper than mere revenge. It wasn't just Park's downfall, it was the triumph of truth, the exposure of a rot that had festered unseen for too long. He imagined Director Park, trapped in his opulent office, watching his carefully built facade shatter, his power dissolving with every flashing news report. The man who had dismissed him with such cold disdain, who had casually crushed his dreams, was now facing a reckoning far greater than Jae-hyun could have ever inflicted with his own hands. The justice was public, undeniable, and utterly devastating. The best revenge, Jae-hyun realized, wasn't just seeing your enemy fall, but being the unseen hand that ensured their fall was utterly spectacular and completely deserved. If you're rooting for Jae-hyun to get his rightful vindication, Give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps us bring more incredible stories to light. The aftermath was swift and uncompromising. The initial shockwaves that rattled Innovatech quickly solidified into concrete legal action. Within days of Jae-hyun's meticulously planned exposé, Director Park was formally arrested. The images of him, once impeccably dressed and radiating confidence, now appeared on every news channel, his face grim, handcuffed, being led away by plainclothes officers. Charges of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty were filed, sending a clear message across the Korean business community that such corruption would not be tolerated. The ensuing legal process, though complex, moved with uncharacteristic speed, fueled by the overwhelming evidence Jae-hyun had provided and the immense public scrutiny. Director Park's carefully constructed defenses crumbled under the weight of irrefutable digital trails and witness testimonies. The shell companies were exposed, the offshore accounts frozen, and the network of collaborators revealed. Park, stripped of his power and influence, faced the full brunt of the law. His trial became a public spectacle, and his eventual conviction and sentencing to a substantial prison term were widely reported, a stark testament to the consequences of his greed. Innovatech itself underwent a painful but necessary cleansing. The scandal had severely damaged its reputation and financial standing. The company's board initiated a sweeping internal investigation, identifying other individuals who had either aided Park or turned a blind eye to his activities. New leadership team was brought in, promising a new era of transparency and ethical governance. While the road to recovery was long, the company, shaken to its core, began the arduous process of rebuilding trust and restructuring its operations, slowly purging the rot that Park had allowed to fester. Jae-hyun watched all of this unfold from a distance, maintaining his anonymity. He received no public recognition, no accolades, and that was exactly how he wanted it. His satisfaction was deep, quiet, and profoundly personal. He saw the news reports, read the analyses, and felt a sense of peace settle over him, a calm he hadn't known since that fateful day 3 years ago. The scar of injustice, which had once felt so raw and painful, had now fully healed, leaving behind a strength he hadn't possessed before. He continued his work at Nexus Solutions, his skills now sharper, his perspective broader. His colleagues and Ms. Lee noticed a subtle change in him, a quiet confidence, a deeper sense of purpose that radiated from his calm demeanor. He was still meticulous, still dedicated, but now with an unshakable conviction in his values. He had not only survived adversity, he had triumphed over it, using the very pain of his past as a catalyst for a greater good. One evening, months after Park's sentencing, Jae-hyun received an anonymous, untraceable email. The subject line simply read, "Thank you." The body of the message was brief. "Your courage brought justice. Many of us are grateful. Innovatech is changing for the better." It was unsigned, but Jae-hyun knew who it was from. Perhaps Min-jun, perhaps another former colleague, perhaps a collective voice of those who had suffered under Park's reign. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. It was the only recognition he needed. His journey had been one of profound transformation. The naive, trusting employee had been broken, but from that brokenness had emerged a stronger, wiser, and more discerning individual. He had learned that true strength wasn't in avoiding pain, but in confronting it, in transforming it into purpose. The best revenge, he had discovered, wasn't just seeing your enemy fall, but in rising above the adversity, in finding your own integrity, and in wielding the truth as your most potent weapon. He had not just exacted revenge. He had achieved vindication, not just for himself, but for the principles of fairness and honesty. Jae-hyun Kim, the discarded employee, had found his true calling, proving that even in the darkest of times, integrity, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of truth can lead to the most profound and lasting triumph. Months had passed since the seismic shockwaves of Director Park's downfall had settled, leaving behind a landscape irrevocably altered. For Jae-hyun Kim, the world felt lighter, the air cleaner. He sat in his usual spot at Nexus Solutions, a comfortable hum of keyboards and hushed conversations filling the bright, modern office. The morning sunlight streaming through the large windows warmed his face, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile glow of his monitors during those long, clandestine nights of investigation. He sipped his familiar cup of black coffee, no longer a desperate fuel for survival, but a simple, comforting ritual. His journey had been one of profound, often brutal, transformation. He looked back at the naive, trusting young man who had walked into Innovatech with boundless idealism, his heart brimming with dreams of innovation and purpose. That version of Jae-hyun, so eager to please, so convinced of the inherent goodness of his superiors, felt like a distant echo from a forgotten lifetime. The memory of his dismissal, once a raw, festering wound that had consumed him with shame and despair, now felt like a deep, fibrous scar tissue, a permanent reminder of a battle fought and won, rather than a pain actively endured. It was no longer a symbol of humiliation, but a testament to his resilience. He remembered the crushing weight of unemployment, the silent judgment from a society that equated job loss with personal failure, the bitter taste of ramen for every meal, the withered plants in his neglected apartment. Those dark days, when sleep offered no escape, and every dawn was a cruel reminder of his brokenness, had been the crucible in which his character was reforged. He had been stripped bare, losing not just his job, but a significant portion of his identity. Yet, from that ashes of that despair, a tougher, more discerning individual had emerged, one who understood the true value of integrity and the insidious nature of deception. The thank you email, anonymous and fleeting, had been the only external validation he had received, and it was more than enough. It wasn't about public accolades. It was about the quiet, internal satisfaction of having righted a profound wrong. He had not only avenged himself, but had also brought a corrupt individual to justice, potentially saving countless others from similar fates within Innovatech. The company, though still grappling with the aftermath of the scandal, was slowly but surely rebuilding, purging the rot that Park had allowed to fester. He had been a catalyst for a necessary, albeit painful, cleansing, and that knowledge filled him with a quiet pride. His definition of revenge had evolved dramatically. It wasn't the fleeting satisfaction of seeing an enemy suffer, though Park's downfall had certainly been spectacular. Instead, the best revenge had been his own growth, his healing, and the ultimate triumph of truth and resilience. It was about reclaiming his narrative, about proving to himself that his worth was not defined by a single cruel act of dismissal, but by his character, his skills, and his unwavering commitment to what was right. He had found his own integrity in the face of another's profound corruption. At Nexus Solutions, Jae-hyun continued to flourish. His meticulous nature, once dismissed as an inconvenience by Park, was now celebrated as a cornerstone of their cybersecurity efforts. His analytical mind, honed to detect the subtlest anomalies, made him an invaluable asset. Ms. Lee, his pragmatic and fair boss, often praised his contributions, recognizing the depth of his insights and his unwavering dedication. He was no longer just a coder. He was a guardian of digital landscapes, a protector against the very kind of hidden threats that Park had embodied. The work was challenging, deeply satisfying, and most importantly, ethical. His personal life, too, had settled into a rhythm of peace and genuine connection. He still met Min-jun for coffee, their conversations now lighter, filled with shared laughter rather than hushed anxieties about corporate politics. Min-jun, who had remained a steadfast friend through his darkest hours, often commented on the transformation. "You're different, Jae-hyun," he had said recently, a knowing smile on his face. Lighter. Like a great weight has been lifted. And it had. The paranoia that had once been a constant companion during his investigation had dissipated, replaced by a quiet confidence. He had reconnected with his parents, their initial worry replaced by profound relief and pride in their son's resilience. He no longer carried the burden of shame, and their calls were no longer tinged with guilt. The small, framed photo of his parents, which had felt so heavy on his Innovatech desk, now sat proudly on his desk at Nexus, a symbol of unwavering support and the dreams he had not only salvaged but amplified. Physically, he was stronger, leaner, the daily runs a ritual that cleared his mind and fortified his spirit. His eyes, once clouded with sadness and doubt, now held a sharper, more focused gaze, reflecting a mind at peace and a spirit unburdened. He was no longer the naive, trusting employee, easily swayed by grand pronouncements. He had matured, becoming more discerning, more skeptical of flashy presentations and empty promises. His future, once a terrifying void, now stretched before him, bright and full of possibility. He pursued his passions with integrity and a clear conscience, knowing that he had faced the abyss and emerged stronger. The shadow of the past of Innovatec and Director Park no longer loomed over him. It was a chapter closed, a lesson learned, a foundation upon which a truly meaningful life could be built. Jae-hyun Kim, the discarded employee, had found his true calling, proving that even in the darkest of times, integrity, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of truth could lead to the most profound and lasting triumph. He was not just a survivor, he was a beacon forging his own new dawn. If you were moved by Jae-hyun's inspiring journey, be sure to check out these other videos on your screen right now.